right, class. Hopefully everybody's well out there. Over the last couple days, you were supposed to have read kind of the rest of chapter 14, sections 3 and 4, and really kind of the build up to the Civil War. And the last thing I really focused on in the video was how you have all these events that lead up to the eventual Civil War that begins, and they all kind of add pressure to the situation until eventually kind of explodes into what will become the Civil War. So we're going to kind of pick that up today. And in 1857, we start with the Dred Scott case. And of course, Dred Scott was a slave who had been traveling around with his master, and occasionally they would visit free territory. All right, they'd live in free territory, but eventually settled in Missouri. And then when his master dies, some lawyers decided that they would kind of convince Dred Scott that, hey, you lived in free territory, you're a free individual, and you should sue for your freedom. And so he does. He sues for his freedom. It goes to the Supreme Court. In 1957, the Supreme Court issues a ruling on that case, and it is a extremely important decision because it really sets in motion this animosity between the abolitionists, the free soilers, and then, of course, the slaveholders. Because what the court decides is two things. One, that Dred Scott was not a citizen and thus could not sue. All right, so they could have left it at that, and everybody would have been probably, you never would have read about this case. But the second thing they decided was that the idea of not allowing slavery in the territories itself was unconstitutional, that the government couldn't deny you the right to property, thus they could not pay any law in the territories that got rid of slavery. All right, so banning slavery in the territories was now an unconstitutional idea. I mean, we had a whole party based on it, the Free Soil Party, completely unconstitutional. Can't do that, all right? Now, if states wish to have a constitution and vote on getting rid of slavery, they could do that. States had the right to do that, but territories run by the federal government didn't have the right to ban slavery in territories. So again, this was a huge win for the slavery South and a huge loss for the Free Soil Party and, of course, abolitionists in the North. And so again, it adds pressure to this already volatile situation. And so then in 1858, you have the Lincoln-Douglas debates, where it's a very, very influential debates between Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas in Illinois. They were running for the Illinois Senate. Douglas was a much more polished politician. Lincoln was kind of the up-and-comer here. But they had these series of debates that are still celebrated today. And looking at the issue of slavery in particular, Stephen Douglas wanted to have popular sovereignty, still allow people to vote. Lincoln saying, no, we really can't have that. Again, the idea that we will become all of one or become all the other, but we will not be divided because a house divided cannot stand. And in the end, Douglas will win the election. But of course, Lincoln becomes very popular, he becomes very famous for these debates and going toe-to-toe with Douglas. And of course, this will help kind of give him momentum going into the 1816 election. Now, before that, then, you have, before the election, you have John Brown's raid. So now in 1859, we have John Brown's raid into Harper's Ferry. Now, John Brown, of course, we talked about at Pottawatomie Creek, went after some pro-slavery individuals, killing 5 of them, he and his group. He is now back on the East Coast, and he's trying to get a slave revolt going, all right, because he sees himself as this divine individual sent by God to get rid of slavery, all right? And so he's going to start a slave revolt. He's going to attack the arsenal at Harper's Ferry. He's going to get weapons. He's going to use those weapons to arm slaves, and it's going to snowball into this big slave uprising. That's what he wants to do. And it goes very poorly from the beginning. All right, so he goes to Harper's Ferry. He gets to the arsenal, but he gets trapped inside the arsenal. All right, the local officials trap him there. Eventually, the militia comes in, led by none other than Robert E. Lee. And when it's all said and done, he loses a son in this exchange. He is captured. He is arrested, of course, and charged, and eventually will be sentenced to death and hung. All right, and so John Brown is hung here, but it's the reaction after John Brown's raid, where Southerners see this as being, well, this is how the North reacts. This is what the North is about. They're going to try to create slave uprisings. We can't live with this. And of course, the Northern response was that John Brown was a martyr, a hero, somebody to be exalted for trying to get rid of this evil, and should be kind of canonized almost in this this exalted way. And so very two different reactions to John Brown's raid and what happened there. And so that kind of takes us through Section 3, and so now Section 4 picks it up with the 1860 election, in which you have Abraham Lincoln running as the Republican, this new party that still is dealing with trying to get rid of slavery in the territories and those issues. And of course, the Democrats are going to be split. You're going to have Northern Democrats like Stephen Douglas, who wants to have popular sovereignty, still deciding this, and Southern Democrats who just, no, don't let the people decide. Court spoken. All right, it's fine. We can have slavery wherever we want. And so that split is going to kind of split the votes between the Democrats, which is going to allow Abraham Lincoln to win the election of 1860. Now, of course, for the South, what's most important there is that Lincoln wasn't even on the ballot in 12 southern states. I mean, you didn't even have a chance to vote for him because he wasn't an option. And yet he still wins the presidency. And so many southern states begin to look at this as, well, we don't even have an option anymore. We're going to lose these elections. The North has the voting power. They are going to vote slavery out of existence. They're going to destroy our way of life. And so South Carolina becomes the first state to secede shortly after the election. All right. 6 other states are going to join South Carolina in 1861, and then President James Buchanan really doesn't do anything about it. And so by the time Lincoln becomes president in March of 1861, already we're divided. States have seceded, and he's kind of concerned that more states are going to secede. So he's trying to prevent that from happening. Now, of course, Lincoln is saying, we don't recognize secession. You are not officially gone from the country. You can't leave the country. All right, you're still part of the United States. And of course, the southern states have created already the Confederate States of America. They have a president under Jefferson Davis. They've already kind of gone through this process saying, yeah, of course we are. We are separated, and we will continue to be separated. And so Lincoln's trying to figure out, well, how are we going to kind of reconcile this and try to bring the country back together? He can't send troops in and be the aggressor because that will just make more states leave the Union and make it more difficult, he feels. He needs kind of have the South make that first, fire or shot or whatever it is that will start this thing. It has to come from the South so that he can then look to try to bring this back together. And he gets his opportunity at Fort Sumter. Now, Fort Sumter is in South Carolina, just off the coast of Charleston. And what happens there, of course, is that it's a Union fort. Now, of course, when South Carolina seceded, they said, well, you got to leave the fort. And, of course, they didn't. The Union was still there, okay? And so Lincoln realizes, well, we can't bring military equipment in there. We can't really help them out, but we can provide food. Food, is not military. It's just humanitarian. And so he kind of tells South Carolina, hey, we're going to be bringing supplies in, but it's going to be food and nothing else. And this kind of forces the hand of South Carolina and the Confederate States. They decide before those provisions can be brought in that they were going to fire on the fort. And so the first firing of the Civil War occurs at Fort Sumter. As it is fired upon, and the next morning, General Anderson, who is, presiding in the fort, rolls the white flag up and surrenders. Nobody was hurt, nobody was killed, I should say, in this kind of exchange. And South Carolina, of course, takes Fort Sumter. But of course, this is the beginning of the Civil War now. Now Lincoln can go ahead and get his troops mustered up, say that the South has attacked the North, or at least the seceded states have attacked the Union, and we can send our troops in and bring them back into the Union. Of course, the irony here is that Fort Sumter is a bloodless start to what is the bloodiest affair in American history. All right, so that kind of puts us up to the end of the chapter 14. And of course, chapter 15 will then deal with the Civil War and everything else that's going to happen there. So that'll be where we pick up the next video. In the meantime, stay safe, stay well, and I look forward to seeing you soon.